Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Carl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be where you are and be who you are.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand. I am here with Carl Forehand, and we have a special guest tonight, Dorothy Littell Greco, and we're going to talk about her book and her story. And is there anything you want to bring up before we dive into this conversation?
I just want to say that we think stories are sacred. Mm-hmm. We've learned to listen to stories, and we're learning from especially women's stories. So in whatever detail, whatever length, however you want to do it, could you tell us who Dorothy is, what you've gone through maybe, and some stuff like that? We'll just go with it, whatever you think.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. At this age, mid-60s, it's hard to summarize one's life. Mm-hmm. What are the key things? What's most important? What stands out for me? Just in terms of simple, I'm mom to 3 grown sons, all of whom are married, and wife to 1 husband. We've been married going on 35 years now. I have worked as a photojournalist, an author, a photographer, a writer since the early 80s. So I've been at it for quite a long time, and have written 3 books. The one that Carl mentioned, For the Love of Women, is the most recent book, and that focuses on misogyny. When I'm not sitting in front of the computer rearranging words or behind a camera taking pictures, I love being outside, cross-country skiing, biking, walking. The ocean is my happy place, and someday I hope to have a vacation near the ocean where the water temperature is above 60, because here in New England, that's about as good as it gets in the middle of the summer. So,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what are your other 2 books? So we're going to talk about For the Love of Women, but what are your other 2 books that you've written, just for our listeners who might be curious?
The first one was Making Marriage Beautiful, and then the second one was Marriage in the Middle. And Marriage in the Middle focuses on midlife marriage. What are some of the challenges and surprises that we face during midlife? Mm-hmm. How can we be ready for them? And how can we be resilient in the face of all the things that midlife throws at us, mm-hmm. so that our marriages can keep growing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah.
So some of this obviously could be connected to religion. You gave several topics where misogyny comes in, and it's definitely been a deal for us for a long time, not just in the United States, but for people, right? Mm-hmm. First of all, how define misogyny for us, and how you see that, and what's involved in it?
Yeah, I'm actually going to read the definition that I have in the book. It's a little bit long. Typically we think of misogyny simply as the hatred of women. And in my opinion, that definition is a little too short, and it allows people wiggle room. Folks will say, well, I don't hate women. I'm married. I love my wife. I have sisters. Right, I love my sisters, etc. So I felt the need to stretch that out and to make it a little bit deeper and more robust, so that people could identify the facets of misogyny more easily. So in the book, I describe it as a persistent, insidious belief that men's ideas, wants, needs, and experiences are more important than women's, and that legal, religious, and social systems, as well as intimate relationships, should uphold these principles. This belief system subsequently influences the laws, policies, practices, and ethos of a given culture. Mm-hmm. So it's a mouthful, but essentially what I'm saying is that misogyny manifests often between individuals, the boss who makes a crude comment to his female employee, or the boyfriend who demands sex from his girlfriend. And those are real. Those are very real, but it's also very systemic. It's deeply embedded in the systems of our culture in particular. This is where I've lived my entire life, so this is what I know best. But it's also across the globe. Like it's everywhere, from the infanticide of baby girls in China that happened for so many years to widows needing to throw themselves on the funeral pile of their husbands in India because there's in their parts of their culture, a widow is worth nothing. So those are just some, quick examples for how it shows up in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I, as a man, sometimes don't even realize that I'm mansplaining or that I have those prejudices.
Mm,
And I hope my voice lasts here, but but it is prevalent, right? And
yeah,
we go back to Constantine, set up the
right.
hierarchical system and all of those things. Where do you see that in religion? I'm curious because our show is about we kind of see ourselves as sitting on the edge of Christianity. We call it the desert.
Hmm.
Um, and we see lots of people go by telling us stories of what happened in there. And what's your experience? What do you understand about it that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I'll answer that in two ways. One is personal and one is the more systemic. When we look back at what the New Testament church was not long after Jesus left the scene, it was incredibly innovative, breathtakingly innovative in terms of how they treated women. And that was in part due to how Jesus treated women. When you read the scripture, the ways that he embraced women who were outcast, the ways the woman who was caught in adultery, rather than picking up the rock and throwing it at her, he called out the hypocrisy of the men who were standing around, saying like, well,
Mhm.
where's the man? If this is adultery, then there's got to be another party here.
Mhm.
So I think that when we look at that, the early church, it was just remarkable the ways that women were invited in, were blessed, were encouraged to lead, encouraged to participate. And then slowly, within the next couple hundred years, it began to revert back to pre-Pentecost practices. And as the church became institutionalized, you mentioned Carl Constantine, right? In the 300s, when Christianity became the religion of the state,
Mhm.
suddenly these house churches and the leadership of women lost ground, and it became again a male dominated religion where women were often marginalized. It's not to say that they always were. There's some remarkable women who led all through, the early 1700s and before that. But in general, when you look across Christianity, there's a lot of broken patriarchy and a lot of misogyny. So bringing that into current, 2026, we can see certain denominations where there's tremendous freedom and tremendous liberty for women to pastor, for women to be elders, for women to bring their whole selves to the table and lead. And then there are other churches, SBC churches, lots of smaller churches, Doug Wilson and his minions, who would rather just have women be literally pregnant and barefoot in the kitchen without being educated and without having any say in not only their religion, but their lives.
Right.
So both of those things exist. Like the scripture does, I think, validate and affirm and encourage women, but a lot of the ways that the faith has been interpreted, scripture has been interpreted, really limit women. I became a Christian in my freshman year of college, and only that very first year was I part of an organization, a campus organization that was quite complementarian. And not long after that, thought, yeah, this is not a good place for me.
Yeah.
And since then, have mostly been part of churches that have blessed women in leadership. Now, that is not to say that I haven't had many, many experiences of being shut down or being pushed to the side or not being listened to or feeling like, if I challenge somebody, I'm going to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I can give you one example. There was a church we were part of, urban church, beautiful, wonderful place, really fabulous people. The Holy Spirit was present. And then about 14 or 15 years in, it was a new church plant. The only way we know how to describe it, my husband and I, is kind of that the head pastor was having a midlife crisis. And he was making some leadership decisions that were really confusing. He wasn't clear. He wasn't gathering quorum to ask other people, like, well, what do you think? And how should we proceed here? So there was one time where I just had this clarity of, I love swimming, but I do not love swimming, distance swimming in the ocean or in a lake where I can't see where I'm going. Like, I need a lane line underneath me and I need boundary lines on each side, and then I can just swim. And so I shared that with him and I said, I feel like I'm willing to follow you, but you got to give me clear direction. I
Right.
need to know where you're taking us as a church.
Mm.
Right.
And boy, he did not like that. And he wrote me one of the most damning, mean, vicious emails that I have ever received in my entire life.
Wow.
Well,
So, was that an example of misogyny, or was he just behaving poorly? I don't know. But the fact that I since discovered that he had written several emails like that to other women who challenged him makes me think, yeah, there was probably a little misogyny in there.
Mhm.
hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, sometimes I call, um, and of course, I'm thinking about the evangelical right wing, the MAGA church and all those
Yeah,
kind of things that are evolving, or hopefully they're devolving now. Um, Never mind what I was going to say.
that's another
Um,
topic.
but if you say that as a denomination we're right and God is on our side, and then you say, and the pastor is way up there, and he's always elevated since Constantine again, and um, whatever he says is right, even if he's demeaning you and so on. So we end up with these people that are leading churches that um, sometimes have very little education, and sometimes
Mhm.
they're just not good leaders. And what they have going for them is they're good looking and they can speak well. And there's a lot of abuse that follows that, and some
Yeah.
of them even brag about it.
Mm.
Um, so would you agree with that? I don't like to
Yeah,
ask yes or no
absolutely.
questions, but
Yeah, absolutely. The person I think of that just comes to mind off the top of my head is Mark Driscoll.
yeah,
I think again and again he has been abusive, not just to women, but also to men. But
Mhm.
yeah,
the things that he has said from the pulpit in conferences and his books are really vile. They're not just heretical, they're vile. And they demonstrate someone who does not respect women, who does not see women as an equal, who believes in hierarchy based on gender, and who feels like he is incredibly entitled to say and to spout these lies. And it's horrible because, he's a very influential person and he's just one of many.
Mhm.
Andrew Tate, obviously not a pastor, thank God, but similarly, he is unabashedly misogynistic. He has a huge following.
right.
And, I shudder to think of all the young boys who are being deeply influenced by the things that he says about women.
Mhm. So we've been talking about misogyny, but how related is misogyny and narcissism? Are they two different things in your opinion? Do they kind of go hand in hand?
I think that they are two different things because narcissism is really just, focus on a self. And so somebody could be a narcissist and not be a misogynist. But
Okay.
I think that oftentimes when men are narcissists, they are misogynist because there's a component of, I don't know if you would agree with this, Laura, but entitlement,
Yeah.
right? That they have a sense of they are most important, their needs, their desires, their wants are most important, and that people have to bow down to them and serve them. So I think that they can be very much linked, but I do think that they're different.
Okay. Yeah, because when you were talking, like when you mentioned Mark Driscoll, I immediately thought, oh, he's kind of a narcissist. So I was
Yes.
just curious, like, how you saw those two things. If you saw that, I like how you said that there are sometimes they do go hand in hand, but they're
Yeah.
two separate like things. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean narcissism is
Eh,
in the DSM, right? I
Yeah,
don't think
right.
I don't think misogyny is in the DSM, although
Probably.
perhaps it
Yeah.
should be.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, an MPD, narcissistic personality disorder. Um, isn't it wide? I'm asking as a question. Isn't it widely held that it's not very curable? Um, that are treatable, I should say, right?
Yeah, I think it is. It's sort of like borderline personality disorder. It's
Mhm.
really deeply embedded. I think that it can be like if someone is open to transformation and is
Yeah.
open to the kind of humility and repentance one would need. But I also think that narcissism goes very closely with being on the spectrum, because there's a
Mm.
sense of not being able to understand what other people think or feel and not connect deeply with other people's feelings. So the more I read about that, the more I see that there's a pretty significant link between narcissism and folks on the spectrum.
Wow, that's
Interesting.
interesting.
Yeah, that's really
So
interesting.
they're, yeah, and they have to become something they're not to unbecome what they are or whatever.
Right,
You know what I'm
right.
saying? Um,
Hmm.
wow.
As
So,
is true for all of us, right? Like if I am somebody who struggles with greed or struggles with jealousy or struggles with fear, I have to then, begin the process of laying down those things and becoming somebody different. And you're probably similar ages to me. It's hard work and it takes a
yeah,
long time.
Yeah,
absolutely.
for sure. For sure.
So in just a minute, I want to go through that list of things that you mentioned in the summary of the book. Um, and let's just do that because I forgot what the other
Yeah.
thing was.
Was gonna say, like, and feel free, like you can always tell us, I'd rather not answer that question, but was there something um in your life that brought you to kind of this position that you have on misogyny?
I think that it's, in the first chapter, I think the first line is I've spent my entire life gathering research for this book. And I think that that is
Mm,
true. I've had many experiences
Mm-hmm.
because of my work as a journalist. I've existed in a lot of male dominated spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And
mm,
I've had to understand and learn what does it mean to be a woman, to walk with the vulnerability that I have as a woman, and to compete with and to prove myself next to men, because
Yeah.
that's what that field is all about.
mm,
Mm-hmm.
So there've been lots of experiences. I've never had any like brutally awful experience. I've not
Okay.
been raped, but
Yeah.
I've certainly experienced a lot of sexism. I've experienced a lot of verbal harassment. There
mhm.
have been times when I have been threatened, but thank God nothing has
Yeah.
transpired.
Would you say, I mean, so you're talking about your field of journalism, reporting, photography, but are you seeing that in other kind of careers, other areas that, because I'm trying to think, like I'm an educator, I'm a teacher. Um, can I see that happening? Yes, but it is kind of dominated by women. Um, but I do think that like typically your administration and things like
That's what I was
that
going to
are
say.
typically men. So I was just wondering, like, do you see this kind of not necessarily across the board because I don't think we can, generalize it that broadly. But I mean, do you find it in other kind of areas as well besides the one that you're talking,
Yeah,
besides what you've
absolutely.
experienced, I guess?
Yeah, and in fact, one of the chapters leads with a story about somebody who is an educator, and she is an administrator in the education system, and the ways that she was overlooked,
Yeah.
passed over for jobs, not taken seriously. So the book talks about how misogyny shows up in healthcare, in
Mhm.
the workplace, in the government, in entertainment and media, in intimate relationships, and in the church. So those are the six spheres that I talk about. And I do think that it's widespread, Laura. I think that in every profession you could find examples of misogyny. And oftentimes, many people wouldn't necessarily label it as that or even recognize it as misogyny. As I was working on the book, I had been interviewing a lot of different people whose stories I knew,
Mhm.
and I reached out to them to say, hey, like, would you be willing to have a conversation with me? And probably half the women I reached out to, their first response was, well, I don't think I have any experiences of misogyny. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I know your story, and you told me one time about this particular thing, and I think that's misogyny. And then there would be this pause, and they'd be like, oh, I
Right,
Yeah.
didn't see it that way
right.
before.
Hmm.
And I think as women, I mean, I don't know if this has been your experience as an educator, but we are so used to accommodating
Yeah.
men who are misogynists that we can't deal with it all the time because that's all we would do.
Right.
So we
Mhm.
have to get good at overlooking it and
Yeah.
just making peace with the fact that this is the world that we live in, and how am I going to navigate without being taken out by it?
Well, even when you were, even when I was talking and giving you kind of like, well, I'm an educator, da da da, all of a sudden it just kind of hit me like, oh, yeah, but most teachers that I know or in the district that I work in are women, but all our administration is it's very
Yeah.
male dominated. So, but I did have an administrator who was female, and yeah, it makes me curious now how much she had to deal with that to get in the position that she was
Yeah.
in,
And
to
even, yeah, as recently I was just doing research for a piece that I was writing, and I came across the statistic that male teachers make significantly more money than female teachers, even if they've had similar experience and in similar grade levels. Like the disparity was something like $125 a week.
wow.
I just think, wow,
Yeah.
like that is really significant. If you're talking about over even just 10 years,
Right.
$125 a week, that adds up to a pretty
Mhm.
Yeah.
decent amount of
Five,
money.
6,000 a year.
Sure does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, let's dig in a little deeper. Okay. You
Yeah.
ready? So I'll go from the way my list is ordered, but just you mentioned healthcare first. How does it show up in healthcare? What do we need to know about that?
There's so many ways that it shows up in healthcare. Everything from, back in the day when I don't even remember when the first date that I talk about in the book, women were reduced to their uterus. Like that was the whole of their being. Their purpose was to bear children. And so everything about them was focused on the uterus. If they were having trouble breathing, it was assumed that there was a problem with the uterus, that the
Mm.
uterus was pushing up against the lung cavity. If they had seizures, which we now know is probably epilepsy, it was assumed that it was because they weren't pregnant and bearing children. So everything, like all of the mental health issues, and you carry that through all the way up into the early 1900s, women were still being diagnosed with hysteria.
Well,
Yeah.
And hysteria is a pretty, big blanket statement, right? And it's what they're essentially saying is you're being emotional
Yep.
right.
rather than being able to say, okay, well, let's look at your symptoms.
Mhm.
One of the things I talk about in the book is endometriosis.
Mhm.
And one of the ways that endometriosis manifests for some women is that it can make them feel crazy. Like they have such chronic pain and they have such mental health issues that come from
Yeah.
that pain that they can be diagnosed as hysterical, as opposed to, oh, you have a really significant issue that we haven't figured out how to treat.
Uh-huh.
Which leads to another example, like why is it that there are millions of women who have endometriosis? There's no clear diagnosis and there's no real significant bona fide way to treat it.
Mhm.
Like, how is that possible that this has been in existence and millions of women are debilitated by it, and yet there are very few studies and they don't have a clear way to treat it? But you compare that to the fact that, the US government spends, I don't have the number in my head, but like 5 times as much to study ED, erectile dysfunction, as
Mhm.
they do to study things like endometriosis or PMS. And I just think, well, if half the population has periods and has to deal with that for half of their life, and only like 15% of men have ED, how do we explain that other
Yeah.
than
Right.
we care more about men's illnesses than women's illnesses?
This is a conversation I just had today with my sisters. One of my sisters, um, not really a daughter-in-law yet, but um, had some female issues going on and she had a miscarriage,
Mm.
but I don't think the DNC got all the tissue
Oh,
removed. So she was having pain and bleeding, and so went back in, and the male physician said, well, this is elective surgery. So it's going to cost you like $6,500 right now, or we won't do it. I mean, thank goodness that there was a second opinion doctor there that said absolutely not. But it's funny because a comment that my sister's, I'm just going to say daughter-in-law,
yeah.
for clarification, she said is like, well, I just love how a man is telling me what is necessary for my body.
Right. Yeah.
And then my other sister, because we were all in this group chat, she was just like, women's healthcare just sucks. It just does. And you're absolutely right that, I mean, women are taxed on, I mean, like you said, half the population, if not more, has a period every month, and we're taxed on that.
Right.
What we were watching yesterday, we were watching some commercial, and I turned to, and it was for men. Well, it had to do with prostate exams. Now men can just get a blood test for prostate exams. I said, must be nice because we women have to put our feet in stirrups every year, and it's an invasive procedure,
Yeah.
sometimes causing pain in women, but yet somehow men, now we can just get a blood test. I mean, it's
test
just
in a couple of days.
it's hard not to be snarky about it,
Yeah,
but
it is. It is.
it's like, wow, like that was fast for men to get, just a simple
Yeah.
blood test. What about women?
Yeah. And in the emergency room, it's not uncommon. Women come in with heart attack symptoms and they're sent upstairs for a psych eval rather than having the blood test that would show whether they actually are having a heart attack or not. Women are not believed when they talk about their pain. Their pain is often dismissed, and women are not given pain meds to the same extent that men are. So, Carl, this is the reason that that's chapter 2 is because this has been an experience throughout, the past 25 years for me. I've got chronic health issues. So I know this chapter. I know this chapter, and I feel it very personally. And I feel it on behalf of my sisters as well, that we have to fight so hard to get the kind of care and attention and to be believed in the midst of having a health crisis.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say one other thing. I remember it was back when my kids were younger, but like old enough where they could take care of themselves, like probably preteen, teenage years, not independent, but definitely not babies. And I just remember going in, and we have a history of hypothyroidism and Hashimoto disease in my family, pretty significant. Like my mom, my sister, my aunt. So it's pretty prevalent. Two of my nieces have it. And I remember going in and saying, I'm just so exhausted. Like, can we just, this is a family history sort of thing. Oh, you're just tired. You've got, you're raising 3 kids, like totally dismissed.
Yeah.
And I like, those are the things I still remember because it's like just to be dismissed in such a flippant way.
Right.
Like, wow, we're not listening. Like you said, we are not listening to women. Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to make a joke. It's probably not good, but in some ways it talks about this issue. I said, if guys had to be pregnant, if they had to bear children, we'd make it less painful. And there may be a little truth to that. I realize it's kind of crass for me to say that, and I don't say that anymore. But it just, the more I learn, and I didn't learn early, I'm learning late. But the
Well,
more
you're still learning,
Yeah,
so thank you for that.
the more I learn, the more I see.
Mm-hmm.
If we tied that back to religion, I'd say that men are encouraged to read leadership and theology books. We don't read women's stories. We don't read things that help us understand our emotions and so on. So,
and that's one of the ways that misogyny hurts men is that it limits your emotional, like what's okay.
Right.
So, it's not okay for men to cry. It's okay for men to be angry. It's not okay for women to be angry. Men can be angry, but men can't be tender. Men can't be soft. And so a man who that's his natural inclination is then set sort of at odds against himself as well as other men. And he either has to fake it and pretend that he's like them or just deal with this like inner sense of there's something wrong with me, as opposed to being like, no, this is what all men are supposed to be like. All men are supposed to be able to be in touch with their tenderness and be able to be empathetic, but culture tells them that they're less than if they do that.
I think that's so important that you bring that up, like, because we could go off on a rabbit trail and say that, misogyny just hurts women, but you're right.
Everybody.
hurts men.
It does. It hurts men also. And we've talked about that before on this podcast. So I'm glad that you brought that up again.
So we're talking with Dorothy Littell Greco, and we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. So we're back, and we're progressing down the list. We're talking about Dorothy Littell Greco's book, For the Love of Women. We're going down to the list of the topics that she mentions in the summary. And we talked about healthcare a lot, probably not enough. But the second thing you mentioned was government. Where do we see that misogyny in government?
Yeah, the second chapter, the next chapter after that is actually the workplace. But the government was one of the harder chapters for me to write because I'm not in government and my experience has not been in government. So I had to do a lot of interviewing and a lot of reading for that chapter.
Mhm.
Um, Gosh, where to start? Coverture. So coverture is from a French word and it means covering. And how that came into play is very early, when the settlers came over from Europe and were colonizing the United States. Um, they incorporated this into practice. It wasn't formally written into laws per se, having that word, but what it essentially meant was that when a woman got married, she was subsumed by her husband, that she became one with her husband, him being the personality or the being that she was under. And as a part of that, that was part of the reason why women couldn't open bank accounts without having their husband's signature. They couldn't open a line of credit without having their husband's
Right.
signature. And this is shocking to say this, but it was not until the 1980s in the
Yeah.
United States that men could rape their wives with impunity. And the legal logic, which just blows my mind, is that, well, you can't rape yourself. So therefore, a husband could not rape his wife, which of course you think like, yeah, you lawyers, I don't know. There are sometimes you just really lack common sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that all those sort of practices that were part of coverture did not get written out of United States law until the 70s.
Yeah.
Again, just like shocking. How is it possible that that could be the case? But
Right.
that's just one example. When the Declaration, or not the Declaration, when the Constitution was written, women were not given the right to vote.
Mhm.
Why is that? Because men didn't think that we were capable of it. There was an article that I quote in the book written by an MIT professor that talked about if women engaged in deep intellectual activities such as voting, their uterus would atrophy. You just think, okay, so where's your proof for that? Like, can you
Right.
give me some statistics or some study? Of course, you couldn't. Like, that
Sounds
was
like an
just,
RFK thing.
yeah, that was just his concept and his way of trying to, justify keeping women out of the vote, because that was during the time that they were fighting for suffrage. So
Mm.
there's those kind of ways that, go way back. But then you think about what happened with Anita Hill, right? And that was in the 92 when she testified before the Senate subcommittee for Clarence Thomas being appointed to Supreme Court Justice.
Yeah.
And what happened to her was horrible. Like, many people don't remember it because it was so many years ago. But if I went back and reread her book, and the ways that she was maligned, she had death threats. They were people who were coming to her house and threatening her. She was completely vilified. And when you read her story and when you read the other stories of women who were also abused by Thomas, you just think, like, how is this possible? How was it that she was interviewed by an all male subcommittee?
Right.
Right. So those kind of things are still happening. Christine Blasey Ford, when that was not 40 years ago, that was less than 10 years ago that the very similar thing happened for her when she testified. She had the courage to come forward and testify. Another thing I'll just mention real quickly is rape culture. So in the United States, rape is actually the easiest crime to get away with. Again, absolutely shocking to think that that is true. But the rate which rapists are captured and put in jail is something like 2%. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And part of that is that the rape kits aren't tested, they're done, but then they're shelved. They've discovered in
Yeah.
the past 10 years that there are thousands of rape kits that
Yeah.
were never, ever opened, that were just done and then they were shelved in some warehouse.
Yeah.
Women aren't believed. It's when I don't know if the two of you read anything about, do you remember Brock Turner, the Stanford student who was caught raping that young woman? I think that was 2018, 2017, somewhere in there. what she had to go through. She has a book that she wrote about her experience. What she had to go through when she testified against him made it absolutely clear to me, oh, this is why women don't press charges.
Yeah.
She was just raked over the coals.
Yeah.
She was, the things that they wrote about her in newspapers was horrible. It was all her fault. It was because she had too much to drink. And that is so much, a part of what the legal system is like. It blames women.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you believe that some of that comes out of purity culture, where we were taught, where we were instructed to teach young men that you can't control yourself?
I mean, which comes first, right? The legal
Yeah.
laws or the Christian, the patriarchal concepts? Hard to know. But I
Yeah.
do think that there is certainly those things are they're on parallel tracks, right?
Attributing.
Is
Yeah.
that sense of it's all up to the girl. The girl has to pay attention to what she wears, what she says, how she acts, whether she drinks or not. But boys and men, they can kind of do whatever they want.
Yeah.
And is this statistic right? About 95% of survivors are telling the truth.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
like you said, only about 2 to 4% are prosecuted. Um, it's and then guys can't control themselves, and it's what she was wearing, and all the things you mentioned. It's so disheartening. It's
It is.
disheartening to see. You talked about where they, you could legally rape your wife up until the 80s or so. Then that's when, and it's no wonder there was Epstein and Trump and all
Yeah.
this circle of stuff
Right, right.
going on at that time, and now we see the full fruition of that.
And yet,
People still somewhat in control.
yeah, I was going to say, and yet we still aren't listening to the victims,
Yeah.
Right.
right? Because like I even said this to Carl either yesterday or today, I can't remember, but it's just like, they're talking about all these, people that, they're waiting to get the names. And I'm like, but the victims have the names. I don't understand why we're not listening to the victims. So, and still, I mean, there are victims, the proof is out there and they're still not believed. It's like, what is it going to take,
Not believed in what we're communicating as a culture is that we don't care about women. We don't care about girls. We don't care about what happens to you. As long as the men in power get to do what they want to do, the rest of you can go to hell. Like, we really don't care. And that is so demoralizing. And I don't know whether either of you spend much time online, but the anger and the discouragement that women feel right now is really palpable.
Yes,
Mhm.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah, indeed. What about the workplace? Let's talk about that a little bit.
We talked a little
Yeah.
bit about that,
Yeah.
didn't we?
Yeah, the workplace chapter was actually kind of a fun one to write because there's so much good data. Like, it's really, really easy to find data on misogyny in the workplace. One of the first things, Carolyn Criado Perez wrote a book a couple years ago. Now the name is going to go out of my head. It's referenced in the book, but she talked about how so much of the world is designed based on the male body. Everything from a piano keyboard, which the range is beyond what the average female hand is. So any female pianist is going to, potentially have problems, tendonitis, that sort of thing, because they can't quite reach that whole, I forget how many keys it is between the PPEs, the suits that people wore during COVID when they were trying to protect themselves. Those are all designed based on a male body, even though most of the frontline healthcare workers are women.
Yeah.
So if you remember back to the days of COVID, like, a lot of the things were so big and bulky, and so these women are trying to do their jobs and having to, flip their sleeves and roll up their legs because they're just not thinking that, gee, maybe we should design these for women.
Hmm.
Crash test dummies, one of the things that Perez talked about.
Yeah.
The crash test dummies are designed based on a male body, and they say that they designed one based on women, but the actual size of it was 4'11" and 98 pounds. Well, that's about the size of a 13-year-old girl.
Yeah, there's very few women that are that size.
And they never have made a crash test dummy that was pregnant. right? So again,
Mm.
they're thinking about what are men's needs and how can we design things for men. They're not thinking about what does it look like to design something for a woman.
Right.
So that's, you know, it's very subtle, but at the same time, that's, I think, a clear example of misogyny. Then toward the end of the chapter, I talk about how there are still some organizations, some businesses, particularly in Silicon Valley, that have business lunches in strip joints. Like they meet there for lunch, and right, so you have like your $5 buffet and then a side of pole dancing, and this is normalized. And I think
Yeah.
like how is it possible in this day and age that a boss would not be thinking about
Right.
how offensive
Hmm.
that would be, not just for any female employees, but you know, you have a man, say, who's struggling with a pornography addiction. Well, to say that this is where lunch is going to be, I just think that is really, really crass and
Yeah.
so insensitive.
Hmm.
So we see it, you know, in so many different ways. The pay differentials, the fact that the workplace is not set up for mothers, you know, the fact that we don't have paid maternity leave. How is that possible that we still do not have paid maternity leave in the United States? You
Yep.
know, when countries in Europe have 6 months to 12
Yep.
months.
Mhm.
Yeah, so there's so many examples.
Yeah, it's funny because here it is, what, 2026. I had a friend who my coworker actually just had a baby. She um does not like breastfeed her child. However, I did have a friend 2 years ago that had a baby, and just, you know, she can't even leave her classroom to go pump. It's like
It's
it's
very hostile. It's very hostile to mothers, the
yeah,
workplace. Yeah.
yeah. And like I said, and yet in my district, the majority of educators are women. So, you would think, but
Right,
nope.
right.
And but the thing is too is that are we speaking up enough about it? Maybe in some places, like I don't know because that is a season of life that I'm no longer in. And I don't mean to say that like so I don't care. That's not what I
Right, right.
mean, but it's like, I just wonder how much we're speaking up for a change in those things in the workplace, especially if it's a female dominated profession. I would just be curious about that, I guess.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think in some ways we've accommodated. You know, we've
Sure.
said this is just the way it
Yep,
is,
that's
and
the way it is.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So multi-layered.
Yeah.
One of the other topics is media and entertainment.
Hmm.
And like you said, I probably got them out of order a little bit, but
No, that's fine.
media and entertainment, what do you think about? What do you think about those things?
Well, let me ask you both. Like, can you think about how many movies can you think about? Are you familiar with the Bechdel test?
Mm-mm.
So it was created by a woman who's a graphic novelist in the 80s. And essentially, it says that to pass the Bechdel test, that was her last name, there have to be two female characters, both of whom have names. They're not just referred to as women. They both have names, and they both have a conversation in the movie about something other than men. That's a
Mm.
really, really, really low
Low
bar.
bar. Yeah.
But think about how many movies that are really big, really popular movies could pass that test.
Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah, not too many.
Not many.
Right. Even the Academy Awards, when they looked at like how many of the Academy Award winners could pass this test, it was less than 50%.
Wow.
So scripts, producers, all of that industry is very, very male dominated. And again, if it's male dominated, if it's saturated, a la what's his name? Weinstein, with male entitlement, male privilege, taking advantage of women, it's just sort of a given that they're going to create things that cater to those interests
Hmm.
rather than telling stories that are female centric, where that really, explore sort of a vibrant female character. I think about Little Women, right?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Amazing movie. It was so rich and so deep. And after watching it, I thought, why are there so few movies like this?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's because the industry is so dominated by men, and for whatever reason, they assume, even though half of the theater goers are female,
Hmm.
that those are the stories that need to be told. So
Hmm.
that's one way. And then I think that I'm sure that you would agree, is that women are objectified
Oh, yeah.
horribly,
Yeah.
Sure.
both in TV and movies, everything from newscasters. I interviewed somebody who was a newscaster here in Boston for a long time at the front end of when women were invited into the newsroom. And she talked about how when she came onto the scene, the women who were asked to be meteorologists, they weren't really, they were just like models. They had to wear mini skirts,
Yeah.
and they had to wear things, they were told to wear things that were really sexy.
Mhm.
So they weren't encouraged to be professional. They were encouraged to appeal to the male gaze. And that is so much a part of the entertainment and the media industry, is how
Mhm.
can we objectify women? How can we sell sex?
Mhm.
And it doesn't really matter what happens to women. And I would include, in the media and entertainment chapter, I talk about pornography. Well, I mean, it just keeps getting worse and worse. When I compare it to when I was I think I first saw pornography when I was like 6 or 7. The place where my father worked came across a stack of Playboy or Penthouse magazines.
Mhm.
That is tame. That is absolutely tame
Yeah.
compared to what's out there now.
Mhm.
The fact that there's routinely choking of women and girls that's shown in pornography, and then boys and even some young men get the sense of, oh, well, that's what women want.
Yeah.
And they're finding more and more girls are being choked as they're having sexual experiences for the first time because boys think that's what
That's
they're supposed to
normal.
do.
Yeah.
It's horrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I was thinking about when you set the low bar, if it passes the low bar, then it's probably classified as a chick flick, right? And it's has to be on Lifetime or something, and not a place for guys who normally watch movies. So it pulls it out of the mainstream
Hmm.
and so on.
And still, even though a lot of those, Lifetime movies, they are very like the women are more, in my opinion, like I don't watch a lot of Lifetime movies, so they may have changed, but just very the women are very submissive characters and, trying to, I'm just
Be
going to change who
sexy.
I am
Yeah.
in order to get the guy.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
True.
we can't be our authentic self. We have to, like you said, be sexy or be demure or be, quiet or whatever in
Yeah.
order to get the guy we want.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Which is such a loss for us as
Hmm.
women, that we have to
Hmm.
dumb ourselves down in
Right.
order to be acceptable.
Hmm. Hmm.
So we'll probably skip over the church right now. We've talked about a little bit here
Yeah.
and there throughout the things we've
Hmm.
talked about, and I don't know if I told you ahead of time, we used to be pastors,
Mm.
and
You
I was a
did.
pastor, you were a pastor's wife, and we were in we could talk about it at a later time. But certainly there's a hyper focus on sex in the church sometimes, and we know that you've covered that in the book. I want to get to this last
Yeah.
one, which is intimate relationships, is what I have down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talk about that just a little bit.
Yeah. So I opened this chapter with a very vulnerable conversation with a young couple. And he came into the marriage still struggling a little bit with pornography. And he was honest, but not completely disclosive with her about what he was struggling with. And for him, the teaching that he had received as part of complementarian churches was that, well, once you get married, you don't have to worry about having a pornography habit anymore because your wife is going to be available to you 24/7. And so whenever you have a sexual urge, you can go to your wife and it's her duty to say yes to you.
Hmm.
So not only did that cause the woman to feel used
Yeah.
oftentimes. It diminished any real chance of intimacy because obviously, if you really want intimacy, it has to be built on trust, it has to be built on honesty, it has to be built on mutuality. And in churches where they communicate to men that it's your birthright to have sex whenever you want, that's not mutuality.
Hmm.
And again, in terms of the scripture, that's not what Paul was talking about in 1 Corinthians 13. He was saying that, your bodies belong to each other. He was advocating for mutuality. He was not advocating for men, you can have your wife whenever you want it. So I think that is just like it's such a damaging thing, right? And that overlays between both the church and intimate relationships. Men who feel a sense of entitlement to women's bodies, whether that's in a dating relationship or as just referenced in a marriage relationship. It's very deadening for women to feel that they're a vehicle for their husband's orgasms, like that rather than them being loved and valued and desired, that it's just about an orgasm. It's just it's so harsh and so damaging. I've had,
Yeah.
as doing pastoral care for the past 25, 30 years, I've had a lot of conversations with women, and those who are not interested in sex, unless there's some health issue, that is the case for some of them. Mostly what they talk about is they don't feel like their husband really cares about them and their pleasure and their sexual journey. It's all about him. It's all focused on him.
Mhm.
And it's so unfortunate because sexual intimacy is meant to be something that really bonds us and brings us
Right.
together. And so when misogyny comes in, it just thwarts what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Reference to Mark Driscoll again,
Yeah,
for that point. I want to bring that one up.
Mm-hmm.
But uh, Dorothy Littell Greco is your name, and For the Love of Women is your book. It's the subtitle is Uprooting and Healing Misogyny in America. Is that right?
that is right. Yeah, we haven't talked much about the healing part and how we get past it, but those are the last two chapters, and I think that is important, right? For a
Mm-hmm.
book that's
Yeah.
so intense.
Yes.
It's not an easy read. Like, I'll just be honest with you. I've had some friends say, I can only read like a chapter and then I have to put it down because it's so
Yeah.
intense.
Yeah.
So it felt like it was really important to have stories of redemption and stories of how is it that we can heal? How can we grow beyond misogynistic culture to get to a place where there's mutual flourishing for everybody? Because to me, that's the goal. Like,
Right.
if you ask me, like, what's the main takeaway that you want for this book, it would be that God loves women and we should too.
Yeah.
Oh,
There
that's
you go.
good. Yeah, that was going to be my last question, but I'm glad that you pointed out that you do have those, redemption stories, those redemption pieces in the book because, I can see how all of this could be very heavy. You're just like, oh my gosh, how do we get ourselves out of this, right?
Right.
And so that's what I was kind of hoping that there would be something that kind of says this is how we can heal from this
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
you know, like we can go like as you're talking, I'm shaking my head like, yeah, we've all experienced if you're a woman and also men, we've experienced these types of misogynistic behavior. So we can shake our head yes and go, yep, yep, I've seen that, I've experienced that in all these different places. But how do we right this ship? I
Right.
guess,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to take some time. It's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be an easy fix. Correct me if I'm wrong. But, the first step is that awareness piece that you're
Yeah.
you're sharing with us, that's
Yeah,
so important.
awareness, and for us as women, like, what does it look like to acknowledge the places that we've been hurt rather than just covering it up or thinking that it doesn't matter? One of the things that just came to mind is, that press conference last week. I'm going to forget the woman's name, Caitlin O'Connor, maybe. She's with CNN. She
Okay.
asked she asked Trump a question about the
Yeah.
Epstein files, and he just so belittled her.
Yep.
And I think one of the things that has made me so angry about those situations is none of the male reporters speak up. Right.
Yes.
And so that's a way that these
Yes.
men are going to have to take a risk and they're going to have to put their necks on the line to say, excuse me, that's not okay. And I
Yes.
think until they do, he's just going to keep making those kind of misogynistic
Absolutely.
comments.
Well, when you were talking and, about the whole government and things like that, I was thinking when he called that reporter, quiet piggy,
Yes.
no
Yeah.
one said a word.
Right. Right.
And I'm like, what are we doing? What are we doing? And yes, Caitlin Collins, I think that's her last name. Anyway, but yeah, that too. It's like I looked at Carl and I said, why are no male reporters standing up and saying, what are you doing?
Because they're afraid, right? They benefit from a misogynistic system.
It's
And so
true.
we need men to be able to say, I am going to put down my privilege to stand up for women, come what may.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's exactly what it takes, is for another man to say to a man, that's
Not
not
okay.
right. It's not,
Right.
it's not
It's
good.
not okay.
No.
You can do better than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we don't have to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great conversation.
Yeah.
So where can people find you? Because and where can they find your book?
Yeah, so the book is, you could find, I always encourage people to buy it from independent bookstores. There's a bookstore in Pennsylvania, Hearts and Minds, and he's offering it at 20% off.
Nice.
You can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it through the publisher. Last time I checked, it was on sale at the publisher too, which is Zondervan. So you can reach me through my website, which is DorothyGreco.com. I'm also on Substack, and I'm under What's Faith Got to Do with It?
Nice. That's awesome.
We've enjoyed this conversation. I want to apologize publicly for not communicating well before the podcast started, but I also want to just give you a lot of praise for how great you were on this podcast. So thank you for sharing your heart with us. Thank you for sharing your story and your wisdom with us. And we want to remind the viewers as you're listening and tuning in, take care of yourself in times like these, and remember to be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary podcast.
Remember, all who wander in the desert are not lost.
We believe all of our stories are sacred.
We are always here if you need someone to hear your story.
Check out our blog on Pathos and also our YouTube channel.
And stay tuned for our Leaning Forward conference.
Remember, we love you.
And be at peace.